Well, thank you all for coming along this evening. It's lovely to see so many of you here on a cold night where you could be rugged up at home watching Netflix or something. As many of you know, I'm Julia Smith. I'm one of the practitioners here. Who here comes to see one of the practitioners at Remede already? Hands up. Great, that's most of you. Excellent. Before you leave, hopefully the rest of you will feel part of the family as well. So tonight we're talking about the gut microbiome, but before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on where we gather tonight. Long before any of the science that we'll talk through this evening, they had a deep understanding and connection to the land and the healing powers of where we live. So I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the gut microbiome, and I'd like to introduce our three panellists tonight. So we have Jo Coates, one of our naturopathic medicine practitioners. You can give a wave if you like, Jo. There you go. Alex O'Byrne, who's our counsellor, and Jane Mangini, who's our clinical nutritionist. So you'll hear from each of these ladies tonight, and then you'll get a chance near the end to drill them with questions. So please hold your questions to the end if you can, and we'll just let everybody have a word. I'd love you all to think about the things that you want to learn tonight, because this is about your learning. So before we get onto the practical side, let's think about what the microbiome is. So the gut microbiome, it's not a new thing to any of us anymore. 10 years ago, having these conversations, you know, it was a new idea, but you've all heard about the microbiome before, I'm sure. Many of you might have done testing. You might have already done a gut program. You might have seen the microbiome talked about in a documentary or by another practitioner. So I don't think it's anything new, but I thought I might update you on some of the new science, because things change all of the time. So one of the numbers we used to talk about is that the gut microbiome holds 10 times more bacteria than human cells. Has anyone heard that fact before? Okay, well that was true, or that was where the science was pointing us to about 10 years ago. It's now showing us that the honest estimate is about 1 to 1. So in terms of the number of actual bacteria, yes, you're still a host to these amazing hundreds of trillions of bacteria in your gut, but they do different things. So the second thing I wanted to update you on is the genome. So the gut bacteria that you have, all of those organisms have more DNA than we normally have. So their DNA is more numerous, which does mean that they outnumber our own DNA, and this is crazy to me, by 100-fold. So you are 100 times more microbial DNA than you are your own DNA. How mind-blowing is that? Isn't it? And the Human Microbiome Project. So again, if you've watched some documentaries around this, you might have heard of that project. So that's ongoing. It's been going for about 17 years now. And this is where, excuse me, they've mapped the healthy and human microbiome, do come through, across the gut and all other areas of the body as well. So we have a microbiome not just in our gut, but the vagina has its own microbiome, the penis has its own microbiome, our scalp has a microbiome, our skin has a microbiome. So these organisms are all over us and within us and doing lots of wonderful things for our health all of the time. So that's kind of a background to what we're talking about. That's the landscape, I suppose. The obvious next question is, and I think I'll direct this at you, Jo, because I know you do a lot of this work. How does this change? How does this knowledge change what we do? What do we do with this in practice?
Well, one of the biggest things I see in practice is that gut health issues rarely stay confined to the gut. So people come in with gut symptoms, so bloating, diarrhea, constipation, reflux. But when we look at the whole picture and we dig a little bit deeper, we often see it's connected to fatigue or mood issues or hormonal imbalance, immune dysregulation or autoimmune diseases as well. So if we look at a few of those things, hormones for example, the gut plays such a huge role in our hormone detoxification, particularly with estrogen. So the liver does a wonderful job of packaging up estrogen and conjugating or binding it to a fat and then throwing it into gut to be eliminated. But if we have dysbiosis or this imbalance of the bacteria, we increase a metabolite called beta-glucuronidase, which cleaves off this fat molecule, so then the estrogen gets reabsorbed back into the body again. So When we're looking at things like PMS or heavy periods, menopause, mood disturbance, then that can be a real issue of the body not excreting the estrogen effectively. When we start to look at mood issues, we know that up to 90% of our serotonin is produced within the gut. Obviously being the sort of the happy neurotransmitter. The gut produces a lot of our GABA as well, and GABA is the brake for the brain, calming the brain down. So if we're not making enough of this GABA, people can experience more stress and anxiety and racing thoughts. When we're looking at the immune system, we know that up to 70 to 80% of all immune-associated cells are housed within or around the gut. So the gut plays such a huge role in that immune balance, and if it's upregulated, then we can have huge issues with the immune system. But likewise, if it's suppressed, people are more susceptible to pick up infections, whether it be coughs, colds, flus. And then autoimmune disease is another area that we see. So whenever anyone has any autoimmune disease, we always want to go back to start thinking at the gut. And is this the root cause of what's actually going on with this disruption within the microbiome? And certainly one of the main areas that we start to look at with the gut and the overall picture of the microbiome is diversity. So there's two things that we look at mainly. One is richness, which is a count. How many bugs were picked up in the sample that you sent off to the lab? But then also diversity is an evenness score. Is your microbiome nice and even, which is what we want? Lots of bugs in small amounts. We don't want to have one species populating the entire microbiome. And what's really been shown that to achieve a healthy, diverse microbiome comes back to plant-based fibres. So a study that they did showed that people that were eating over 30 plant-based fibres in 1 week had a much more diverse and rich microbiome compared to the people that were eating 10 or less plant-based foods. So these people were shown to have much higher levels of your short-chain fatty acids, which are the food for the microbiome. They were also shown to have much less antibiotic-resistant genes as well, which is a really good thing. So our aim, what we always try and encourage patients to do, is to try and reach 40 different plant-based foods within 1 week. So still getting the proteins in, but really focusing on the plant-based foods. So we've given you a really nice little handout in your goodie bag to a bit of a checklist to be able to see how many different plant-based foods are you actually eating within a week. So we're creatures of habit, and people often have very healthy diets, but they eat the same 15 things every week. So have a bit of a look at the checklist, tick everything off that you eat in a week and count it up at the end and say, are you near the 40? And if not, where can we try and expand on this a little bit more? Because that is the biggest factor in improving the diversity in your microbiome. And I heard a really interesting thing the other day saying that basically if you were to pick one test to gauge where you're at and your health and what risk you might have of chronic disease later on in life, getting a gut microbiome test and having a diversity score is probably one of the most important tests to do, because a poor diversity in your microbiome has now been linked to basically all chronic diseases, whether it be cancer, depression, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's. So by knowing that you have a poor diversity, poor richness, not enough of these good guys within the gut, there's work to do, there's room to move to try and improve that, and it really can be as simple as trying to eat more plant-based foods within the diet.
Love that, because that's really actionable. That's something we can all do, isn't it? And I also like that, when we talk about diversity and richness, I always go, I learned this around thinking about a rainforest, and I always think about, a really lush forest has so many different microbes and plants and things living within it. And that's just the same as the gut, isn't it? It needs that diversity to feed off each other, to develop the ecosystem, essentially. Yeah, great. So talking about plant fibre is a solution already, so we're already getting some tips from these guys, which is great. One of the things I find, because we have information at our fingertips these days, so a lot of people come in to me already, and they probably do to all of us, with some solutions they've tried, and maybe they've plugged their symptoms into AI and it's given them an idea of what they could do. Is there anything that you find with that? Is there something typical you see people coming in with, or what are your thoughts around that sort of self-solutions? What are your thoughts on that, on the self-diagnosis and self?
I think AI can be really beneficial in the fact that it's giving patients a lot of education, which I think can be really powerful. I think when it becomes harmful is when AI starts to recommend and suggest certain supplements, herbs, which can be incredibly detrimental if you're not looking at the whole person, you're not looking at their medical history, you're not looking at their family histories, you're not looking at what medications they might be on. It's only giving you answers based on the information that you give it, and if you're only selective in giving it a certain information, then it may give you some really damaging and harmful suggestions. So one of the common ones that we see if people have gut issues, or it might be SIBO or parasites, it might suggest to take berberine or oregano. And I've seen it time and time again when patients come in and they say, oh, you know, ChatGPT told me to take oregano and I've been taking it for 6 months and my gut's really bad now, it's just getting worse. Some of these herbs that they're recommending, you need to be so incredibly careful with them. They are very good at killing off bad bugs, but they're also incredibly good at wiping out everything else in your microbiome as well. So you really need to have a professional be able to look at the individual results, be able to see, is this actually someone that's going to benefit from these particular herbs or nutrients? Do we need to do a titrate dose? Do we need to do a rotating dose, a pulse dosing? So it's very rarely now that we would actually use those two herbs. Very, very rarely that I would even prescribe them, only for a very set individual. But unfortunately, it's something that's recommended very commonly. So it's just trying to be a little bit more cautious about just taking the advice off AI.
I saw a patient recently who'd been using berberine for blood sugar management and had exactly that sort of response for the gut. So yeah, our herbs are amazing. They're powerful, and we need to be, mindful about how we use them. So can we move on to Alex? Is that all right? So Alex, we started hearing from Jo there around the other functions of the gut. So, looking outside of digestive misfunction maybe, and maybe the other things that it does. So we mentioned serotonin and GABA. Can you, I guess, help us to look a bit more broadly maybe at the connections that, from a counsellor perspective?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The gut doesn't work in isolation. Obviously, there's a lot of messages going from the gut to the brain, and we know, I think I read last night when I was researching this, it's 80% of the messages are actually coming from the gut. So central to this, do I have to? Yes, sorry, I'm a newbie. So the relationship between the gut and the brain is actually through this autonomic nervous system. So we've got these two branches, I'm sure you've all heard of: fight or flight, sympathetic activation, rest and digest, parasympathetic. So we've got to cast our minds back to thousands of years ago when we were in this autonomic nervous system. This is almost like an internal survival software. But when we look around today, modern life has got super crazy. And so this autonomic nervous system is now detecting threats like what the modern pressures that we're all working with. So thousands of years ago, it may have been a dangerous animal, a predator, whereas now it's really about managing timelines at work, managing households, chronic health issues, hormone changes, managing children. You get the gist. Modern life has become super crazy. But this autonomic nervous system has remained the same. So when the autonomic nervous system, it perceives these modern pressures as threats, what that actually does is we literally trigger this fight or flight response. So when we trigger this fight or flight, we've got adrenaline, we've got cortisol, so really helpful hormones when we're under pressure. But when we're not returning back into recovery and we're staying in these chronic states of activation, digestion doesn't become a priority. So we're very much in fight or flight, scanning for danger, and the body's putting all of its resources into managing all of that stress from modern day pressure. So unless we're constantly scanning for danger, going back into recovery, that can obviously, over time, it's not necessarily the stress that's the problem, but it's managing constant states of stress and constant states of sympathetic dominance that basically impacts our gut microbiome and our gut health. So as Jo and Julie have said, food is absolutely important, but it's actually not necessarily just about food, it's actually about the state of the nervous system in which we're eating. Because if we're constantly in that fight or flight, thinking about the next thing, we've got the cortisol, we've got the adrenaline, we're not actually in the optimal nervous system state for us to digest properly, to maximise what these ladies have been talking about around the quality and diversity of the gut microbiome. So, we'll talk about the parasympathetic in our next set of questions, but that just gives you a little bit of a understanding on how this historic software system hasn't had an update, but modern life has got super crazy. So,
and I think in practice we perhaps see that presented in things like IBS.
Absolutely.
And, we do see even someone who doesn't necessarily have a medically diagnosed IBS often recognises that their symptoms might be worse when they're feeling under pressure or when it's Christmas. And
you can eat exactly the same foods on different days, but when stress levels are different, it's going to have a different reaction.
So true.
Yeah.
So true. Thank you.
Cool.
And on to Jane. Kind of
Jane.
Naturally, really on to Jane next, I think, because if we can... we know that if Alex is right, that the nervous system governs what's happening with the gut. What can we do with that? How does that affect us, I suppose?
Yeah, well, it's that gut feeling, isn't it? So it's so connected. And I think sometimes we are so busy in our family life that we're all just eating in separate rooms, eating in the car, opening packets of things, and we're not really tuned into how that food makes us feel. So I'm always, I don't ever want to change anyone's diet. So, you've got to get off all that and you've got to eat 40 plants. And people are like, what's a plant? And I just like, how can we tweak things? And I love people to monitor their signs and symptoms. And we haven't brought up poo yet, but we love poo here, bowel motions, professionally bowel motions. And, we all talk about bowel motions with our clients because it's such a sign and symptom of what's going on inside. So I just think, monitoring bowel motions, monitoring bloating, monitoring reflux, monitoring how you felt after you ate something. And I created a little journal because I love people to jot things down and then they're like, oh, actually, I did eat my meal too late and I didn't sleep well, or, oh, gee whiz. And I thought another interesting thing is they say that 94% of Australians don't eat 5 vegetables and 2 fruits a day. And we're all like, oh, that's not us. It's not us. And then when we write it in a journal, we're like, So I had a bit of leftover pizza for lunch and then there was some pasta for dinner and I grabbed a toastie on the run. And then you're like, well, where were the fruit and veggies? And I think we've come, no one's sitting around, not no one, but we're not sitting around the dinner table, we're not celebrating, we're not relaxed, we're not enjoying the preparation of the meal together as the Europeans all, create the meal together and they share it together. And it's that habit, it's not just the food we eat, it's the environment we're in and just seeing how you feel after you eat it and how you feel the next day and tracking and monitoring digestion and poo, of course.
Yeah.
Tracking vegetables too.
Absolutely. I've often wondered if that was the original purpose of saying grace before a meal.
Yeah.
When you stop and say grace. And this isn't coming from a religious perspective at all. But when you sit with your family and you say grace, it actually brings you into where you are.
Absolutely.
It makes you focus on the food and focus on each other. And whether you choose it to be religious or not, I think there is some merit in just taking those 30 seconds to kind of go, okay, we've set aside the devices. We're not watching TV. We are just here with our food and each other. And you might only be eating for 15 minutes, but you know what? That's just a great time to really connect with what you're doing.
Well, it also cues the parasympathetic nervous system that,
Love
it's
it.
time to rest and digest.
And don't you think some people will be like, oh, I can't eat food like that, and they go on holiday and they can eat whatever they like or whatever. It's because we're in that relaxed state. So it's
Totally true.
so impactful.
So we've talked a lot about the theory and what's going on. Should we look at a report? So Joe's like, yes.
Here, Joe, take the mic.
So Joe, can you take us through? So I've got a few just key slides. So just for everyone in the room so that you know, this is a real report. This is from a real Remede patient. They've given us permission to use their data, but obviously it's de-identified, so we can't all go knocking on their door and say how awful their gut might be or how lovely their gut might be. But Joe, can you just talk us through what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so this is firstly looking at the pathogen panel. So a lot of people, when they want to get their gut tested or come in saying, you know, I want to see who's in my gut, what's living in my gut. And a lot of people think that they've got parasites or think they've got pathogenic bacteria. So this is one of the first panels we look at. At the top, we've got the bacteria, and you might see a few E. coli you've heard of, salmonella you might have heard of. So there's a few of the nasty guys up there, and we love those little green boxes saying not detected. So in this particular sample, none of the nasty bacteria were detected, none of the nasty parasites were detected. So that's really great. But then we look at what the microbiome is actually doing. And this is what's really important. The bugs within our gut have a function and they produce metabolites. And we like to look at these metabolites because it gives us so much information about what's actually going on within the gut, but within the body as well. So with this particular one, we're seeing branched-chain amino acids, BCAA. They're really elevated. Trimethylamine producing microbes elevated. This is really inflammatory, not only for the gut, but systemically for the whole body. And when we can see it in the red there, we know there's a lot of inflammation going on. We can see mucin degradation's really high. So again, inflammation. Mucin is the beautiful thick lining that we should have within the lining of the gut. But this is being eaten away by overgrowth of bacteria. We've got your butyrate-producing bacteria as well. Butyrate, if we had to pick one marker for the gut health, butyrate is number one. And you can see the levels are really, really low. Butyrate's so involved with reducing not only gut inflammation, but systemic inflammation, but also barrier, the integrity of that gut. So if the levels are really low, we're much more likely to have more of this intestinal permeability or leaky gut going on. Microbial richness, so this is the count of how many bugs actually are within the microbiome. So when it's in the red, there's not enough. It's a hungry microbiome. We need to feed it up and get more bugs in there. And the IPA producing microbes, this is a beneficial metabolite. So IPA is all about reducing inflammation, anti-inflammatory. So when the levels are really low, we know that anti-inflammatory action's not happening. So this picture, we're seeing a lot of inflammation going on, not only in the gut, but systemically in the body as well. So then the test actually breaks it down. So you can sort of see on the side the different health categories that there are. So intestinal motility, how fast is this gut actually moving? Intestinal inflammation, the barrier, systemic inflammation is what we're looking at here. So you can see all the metabolites in the red that are really showing that there's this inflammation, huge amounts of inflammation that's really occurring within this person's body and within their gut as well. So the case where we're looking at was, it wasn't a gut case, which is really interesting. It was actually more of a mood disturbance case. Energy was really low and insomnia as well. So we can really see when we're looking at mental health issues, a lot of depression is really closely linked to this neuroinflammation, this inflammation in the brain. So if we've got more of this systemic inflammation, which is being driven by the gut, if we can calm this gut down, if we can reduce this systemic inflammation, the inflammatory metabolites that the gut's actually producing, you often see a really nice correlation with the brain and just calming down, the mood really starting to lift and improve as well. One of my favourite parts of the report where I get my nerd on is really start to look at the species explorer, and with this we can just scroll all the different bugs that are actually picked up within that person's microbiome. So if you see up the top it says bacteria and 101, so this person had 101 bacteria that was detected in their microbiome. If they were at uni they would fail, so we want to see over 200. So 100 is a really, really low level. So if you get over 300, you get given a golden star for having a golden poo, apparently. So we want to see over 200. So if someone's got a microbiome of just 101 species, it's incredibly deficient. As I said, it's a hungry microbiome. We need to feed up this good bacteria within the gut. On the side here, we can see little red dots. So these are what we call pathobionts. They're not pathogens, and in small amounts, they're totally fine hanging out in the gut. But when their population starts to expand, that's when they can start to have negative health outcomes. And in this instance, it's these pathobionts that are producing all of those inflammatory metabolites. So the top 10 here, you can see relative abundance, the 8.6. So that's taking up the most amount of real estate in the whole entire gut. So we can see the top 10. We want to see little green dots there. We want to see what the green dots are called commensals. They're having a positive health outcome within the body. And we can see in the top there that they don't have any green dots. So our role is really going to be about feeding up this microbiome to try and get all the little green dots as high as possible and crowding out the pathobionts. It's not so much necessarily about killing the pathobionts because they have a role within the body in small amounts. As I said, they're totally fine. But it's this competitive exclusion. If we can feed up the good guys, you will naturally crowd out the pathobionts as well.
Lovely explanation, thank you. And I guess just also to put that into perspective, you know, it's not to say this person has done a bad thing, that is, you know, they haven't eaten well or whatever. There's lots of things that can affect the microbiome. So, you know, medication this person might have needed to take through their life, antibiotics, oral contraception, all of these sorts of things can affect the way the gut's functioning. A high stress, a high level of cortisol ongoing can really impact someone's digestion and lots of other things as well. You know, alcohol consumption, smoking has even been shown to affect the way the gut's functioning. So, you know, this isn't to blame or to tell anyone that they've done a bad thing, but it really does help if we can identify some of these causal factors, and for this person to really improve their mental health and energy levels, which is incredible, isn't it? So we've looked at, thank you so much, Jo, that was wonderful. I was fascinated by it.
Very much so.
So we've looked at what happens in the gut and the sort of ways that we can test. Alex, back to you. So we know what's going on in the terrain. We've tested to see what's happening. What can we do next? What tools can we do to connect the brain and the
Yes. So obviously it is one big ecosystem, as we've spoken about, and generally the gut and the brain likes to be in balance, in homeostasis.
She's such a handy person, isn't she?
Yeah, too much?
Just hold
Okay, right. I'm using too many gestures. So I think, when we are in that sympathetic dominance and our stress levels are high and our baseline and anxiety is high, how do we tip back into parasympathetic? How do we get back into homeostasis? So I probably just need to put it out there. If there are any past experiences, any unresolved emotional experiences from childhood, sometimes we get into that sympathetic dominance for good reason, because that's actually a protective state that allows us to feel safe in our environments. So working through with a trained professional around what some of those root causes are for that sympathetic dominance would be the first step. But I think for the rest of us, how do we get back into balance? We really need to answer the simple question, am I in danger? Yes or no? So how do we cue signals of safety? So the parasympathetic nervous system, which is where we do our best digestion, is actually turned on. Not that it's ever turned off, it's always there, but we need to be able to navigate between the two branches of the autonomic nervous system. So, it's not some elaborate wellness, another thing to add to the routine. Sometimes it can be really simple things. So like sort of Jane was touching on and Julia with the grace. So part of that is how do we create the conditions so when we're eating we feel like we're in a position of safety. So taking a few deep breaths, we know that the inhale is more around the sympathetic, so bracing for danger. So the exhale almost signals to the parasympathetic that exhale, I'm safe, everything's okay, there's no dangerous animal, I don't have all the modern pressures right in this moment. So taking, a long, slow breath before we start to eat, maybe observing what we are actually eating, noticing the food, the texture. Are we scrolling on our phones? Are we trying to think about the next hour? So thinking about just, am I present in this moment to focus on eating for 5 to 10 minutes a day? Because sometimes we can't remove the stressors in our life. We've just got to get better at how do we metabolize the stress. So sometimes that is creating these little simple routines, but practicing them consistently to give those continuous cues of safety. But I think another one is just finding those micro moments throughout the day, even when you're filling up your water bottle at work, having that moment, am I conscious, am I present, taking a walk at lunch. I often on the way to work, I am off in my head and I'm thinking about a million different things and I'm like, hold on a minute, just ground yourself in this moment, what's going on for me right now, grab my breakfast on the way to work, have a moment before I actually fire up my computer to actually be conscious in that moment. Because in that consciousness, you're not scanning for danger and you're signalling to that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest, that it's safe to digest, we're able to have that moment of rest and recovery. Yeah.
Awesome. And I believe you put some tools in our goodie bags, some handouts for people.
Yeah,
to
there's a good one in there. It's a really simple one, adopted from Russ Harris, who was acceptance and commitment theory. So it's really just around dropping the anchor. So it's like taking those moments because sometimes, as I said before, we can't remove the stressors. We still have to go to work. We still got to pay the bills. We've still got to raise children. We've still got to deal with, chronic whatever's going on for us. But dropping the anchor is just a good one, but it's practice, because often when we're in that heightened state, it's too late. We're already in that fight or flight and we've snapped into action and we cope in the ways that we always have, and that becomes that pattern. So creating a regular practice, really starting small, that's when we can create those new pathways, and that becomes our second nature when the stress starts to overflow.
Love it. Thank you so much. So can we come back to you, Jane? We talked about the reason why 30 to 40. So the research is around 30 plant foods, but we always aim for 40 because we want to be best at Remede.
Yeah.
Overachievers, absolutely, to the core. So how do we do that? How on earth do we eat 40 plant
how
foods
on
a
earth?
week?
It does seem daunting. I often give the little checklist to families and get the kids involved, because we talk about eating the rainbow and just mixing things up. And, I've got 2 sons at home who like to eat the same food every single day because, they're bodybuilding. So they eat the chicken, the broccoli and the sweet potato or the rice. And I'm like, hey, your gut diversity. Anyway, we can talk about that later. But including things like spices and herbs, or just mixing up, one day I had a coleslaw with a green cabbage and the next it's purple, or maybe I've grabbed some purple carrots. It's all, putting a little bit of chia seeds or, some frozen spinach in my smoothie, just every opportunity to add something in. And I love the way Jo used the crowding out of the microbiome. I use that technique, the crowding out for the food. So I won't say to anyone when they come and see me, oh, that's rubbish, you can't eat that, you can't eat that, I would never. It's like, okay, cool, that's where we're starting. Now, how can we crowd out a few of those things? I don't tell them that. I just go, hey, what about we add a little bit of this, or half a plate of veggies here, or have a little bowl of veggie soup. And in the end, we're consuming all those wonderful, different coloured polyphenols and vitamins and all the gut fertiliser. We're just consuming gut fertiliser.
Yeah, I love it.
Just a little bit here, a little bit there.
Does that, in a really practical sense, does that mean things like, the salad bags you can get that have like a mix of things?
Yeah.
Does that tick the box for you?
Totally. And,
Nice.
even, people are so busy and they're just like, I just grabbed a burger, and I go, you can buy a bag of mixed vegetables that are snap frozen. Just chuck those in. Chuck a bit of chicken breast in, there's even par-cooked rice on the shelf, black rice with quinoa. I mean, that is better than buying food somewhere else. I mean, even though I own restaurants, so I'm sort of, anyway, but that's another story. But basically, you're better off just making your own food where you can. But I always go good, better, best. And of course it would be best if we had our organic vegetables delivered and we made everything from scratch and we stayed home all day doing that. But often it's not practical. So where can we choose good, which is, I threw a yogurt in my bag, I bought some blueberries from the shop, and I've got a snack box of almonds. That's great. And that's adding up.
Yeah, I love that you give a big tick to frozen veg.
Totally.
I'm often on my own. My husband works away, and for me, having frozen veg when I get home at 7 o'clock, and yes, I'll have a piece of fish or chicken, but knowing that I don't have to think too much about it.
Exactly.
It's there, but it's still doing the job. Yeah. And a bit of seed mix and something.
Yeah,
yummy.
good, better, best. Yeah.
Excellent. Can we get a nice round of applause for our 3 lovely ladies? Thank you so much again for coming, and do linger around and have a chat to the ladies.
Have you used that app, Yuka?
Yes.
Yeah, what do you think of it? It's very general. Yeah.
It also says for some things that are bad, that it's good.
It gives it a really bad rating. And then it's, I thought. So supermarkets.